an affiliate professor, biotechnology management at the Grenoble École de Management. Pete. Innovation drives value creation.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Good afternoon. I heard at the beginning of the morning that there were going to be a couple of presentations. It looks like I'm the first one. I've kind of just changed the title very slightly. You'll see that facilitate it has replaced manage it. I was just testing this presentation with a couple of industry colleagues, and they all said, get rid of that management word. And perhaps it's interesting that the people I was talking to were people that were doing creative innovation in industry, and they don't like the management word. They came up with several words, and I chose facilitate because I think actually, again, it can be a buzzword, it can be a bit of a cliche, but I think it tells the story quite well. So I'm Pete Harpum. As Andrew mentioned, I'm at Grenoble École de Management. I'm on the staff, I'm on the faculty at the University of Manchester. My teaching interests and research interests are around the management of innovation projects, or projects that have large amounts of innovation. And so I just want to provide a few pointers in the next few minutes of where we might look for improving the way the industry innovates. If I can get my slide machine to work. It's very nice. Okay. There's been a lot of discussion last year at the FT Pharma conference, and quite a lot of discussion this year about innovation. Plenty of firms are working on being more innovative, and we heard many people, particularly before lunch, talking about that. And also, you know, if you look around and see the heads of R&D, quite often they're being retitled as the head of innovation. There are at least 2 or 3 heads of strategy and innovation in the industry, in the mid, and in fact in the large pharma organisations. Let's just have a quick look at last year's themes. These came out of the conference. I've got these on I actually wrote a paper. These are available on the paper, and I can make the link available to you should anyone want them. So the first one is the ability to foster and monetize disruptive innovation being a key determinant of success in the future, with Me Too players squeezed out of the market between high innovation companies and big generics. This was said by a couple of people last year. 2 is an institutionalized ability to identify and learn from new areas of knowledge from any source. And I want to pick up on some of that aspects around any source. It's vital to support effective technology convergence and the creation of disruptive innovation. And that's also been mentioned today a couple of times. 3 is the high quality leadership needed to bring the industry through this current transformation, and the need to reconsider reporting structures and roles to allow accountability for execution to be pushed further down into the industry. Of course, executing strategy is actually the work of innovation. I'm not always sure that that's clearly understood, not the least by those that are actually doing the innovative work themselves. They don't make the connection that they're actually delivering strategy, at least they should be. Theme 4 being an urgent need for increased commercial realism in R&D operations, driven by the closeness now of the costs to the returns for the R&D work. And 5 being the increasing numbers of collaborators on new life science products, requiring more inter- and intra-company communication linkages. And we've heard that repeated today. Just quickly to look at a slide from Ken Caton at Tufts. Many of you might have seen this. I really put this up just to set the scene. I'm sure it's familiar to you. I've added, you can see it goes up to 2008. This is the number of products making it to the market. I've added the red dots on the right-hand side just to bring it up to date. I'm not sure if you can see them. You probably can. Over the long term, it's clear that the number of products being generated that are making it to market is relatively flat. Quite often you hear this discussion that productivity is in terminal decline. Look at the rates of new products, they're going down. Well, if you start in the 90s and say, look, we can't make anything like we used to, then that is perhaps a view of it. If you actually go back and look over the very long term, productivity is relatively flat. Yes, the costs are going through the roof, and there's no doubt about that. So the issue becomes the cost per product. Some of the explanations for this problem, this broken model, quite often talked about. Low-hanging fruit has been taken. Diseases with high unmet medical need are just more difficult to deal with from a scientific point of view, and we heard this morning about the challenges around neuroscience being a good example in this area. Regulatory hurdles have increased disproportionately in relation to the actual risks, perhaps reflecting society's changing perception of risk. And yes, the regulators as well as industry are looking at ways to try and overcome that, bringing the patients into the decision-making process about the risks they're prepared to take. Perhaps slightly more contentious view, high levels of profitability and returns through the 80s and 90s led to a lack of pressure on industry to sufficiently innovate. If you look at the pipelines that were cleared out through mergers, I mean, one could say there's some evidence there that the pipelines were rather full of products that didn't have a particularly good prospects. So I'm not particularly intending to get into the reasons for this flat productivity. It's a good debate we can have. As I said, I just want to set the scene for where we are. Okay. Andrew and Moncef Slawi this morning talked about architecture, a corporate architecture for delivering products and creating innovation. So, you know, if we look at the corporate world, focused on growth at the top of the slide, I mean, for most industries, these concerns are fairly similar, fairly generic. We're interested in corporate leadership, senior executive leadership, strategy, structure, the purpose of the organisation, corporate social responsibility. Of course, there are tweaks depending on the industry, but those are generally the concerns. If we look down at the bottom, the technical world exists for most organisations. Whether you're in the finance industry, whether you're in software, whether you're in drug development, someone has to do quite a lot of technical work, whatever that may mean. Of course, in the life science industry, the areas of concern in the technical work include science, of course, nature, the nature of nature, technical innovation, because this is where the innovation in the technical world will get done, experimentation, the refutability of hypotheses, and the validity and reliability of data. And we heard a quote this morning from Moncef, the facts speak for themselves. Sandwiched in between the corporate and technical worlds is this layer of middle to senior management that are charged with, or should be charged with, managing and facilitating innovation. The issues of concern then are about the behaviours of humans, how work is organised, and in this case, predominantly around projects, new product projects. The complexity surrounding the work created by organisational size and structure, and particularly the need for multiple strong functional groups. We heard this morning at the stovepipe structure of many organisations. So at this level, we also have to face and deal with organisational and project uncertainty. Uncertainty of timelines, resource availability, product specifications, suitability for the market, and the availability and prioritisation of money to carry out tasks. So effective facilitation in this middle layer then glues and binds corporate growth and scientific drive for knowledge. This facilitation layer must also encourage the flow of the needed information that has to flow from the technical world up to the corporate world to have effective decisions made, and the decisions have to flow back down to the technical world. An effective facilitation of innovation has always got to deal with this need for stimulating information and stimulating decisions. And that can be quite a tough call, actually, for that part of the business at times. Quite good at stimulating information, not perhaps quite so good always at stimulating decisions, at least decisions that don't change from meeting to meeting and stay the same until the data changes. So scientific and technological innovation is carried out in the technical world, and this is the tool. The scientific world are the tool for carrying out innovation. And the middle layer is responsible for facilitating that innovation and, critically, for creating the right environment in which that innovation can flourish. Quite a few industry-wide initiatives. Nothing new here, I don't think. In the corporate world, mergers and acquisitions, with value added being derived from synergies and the acquisition of new product pipelines, many of which, as I just said, were cleaned out. Size has become quite an important factor for competitive positioning, consolidating the drive of efficiency through scale and structure. Again, we've heard this morning. The disaggregation of discovery and early development, particularly across many of the pharma companies, has attempted to create innovative environments around which, it's similar to which pharma and biotechs are operating. So we're kind of trying to make it a bit like you're in a small biotech, but you're not. You're really in a big pharma. And you know, GSK have 3-year funding models. I know other organisations have something similar. But there's also a structural issue around the significant increase in the amount of outsourcing. Tens of thousands of people have been leaving the buyer side, the big pharma buyer side, and quite a lot of them have been going to the supplier side. They're going to the CROs. And you know, there's sort of a partial discussion this morning about, is that because of cost? Is it because the supplier side is better at delivering niche expertise? It's probably a combination of both of those. Much of this activity has improved the short and indeed medium-term outlook for many firms and has helped consolidate revenue and also to drive profitability. But they've not solved the longer-term issues related to the development of sufficient new products to maintain and indeed grow earnings. I think some players in industry have developed more robust pipelines that look better for the future than others. In the technical world, we hear lots about Six Sigma coming in from the engineering industries, being widely used across industry to increase the efficiency of work processes in the scientific and technical functions. It's generally about doing the same work for less people, less cost, and through process optimization. Quality by design has had a major uptake, particularly by the FDA. ICH Q10 lifecycle quality system is all about quality by design. And speed. There's constant search for ways to decrease the time to market for products through design, development, implementation of new and improved technical processes. What's happened in the middle part? What's happened in the layer of the organisation that's looking to facilitate the innovation, to use the tool more effectively? From the inside and crucially from the outside of the firm, there is a drive for innovation, there's a need to drive innovation and to produce an environment in which disruptive innovation can happen. My view is that this part of the industry and this part of organisations in the industry need significantly more attention if they're going to achieve the levels of innovation seen in other industries. So my research shows that there's quite a gap here between, say, oil and gas, upstream oil and gas, between, say, defence aerospace, industries that have very high risk, very high technology, highly innovative products that take about 10 years to get on the market, cost about $1 billion, they're highly regulated, they have a whole bunch of very clever scientific engineering types working in, yes, stovepipe functions. So these other industries are not so dissimilar to drug development and the life science industry in general. Okay, 2 primary forms of organisational structure for managing innovation. So this research, this knowledge goes back a long time. In 1961, Burns and Stalker were identifying 2 types of structures that foster innovation. There's a mechanistic structure, and they describe the mechanistic structure and its associated management processes, which are very good for managing non-complex, low-level innovation, perhaps where we need to move from in this industry. Now, very quickly, let me just tell you some of the characteristics of a mechanistic structure. There exists a high level of specialised differentiation of functional tasks. The tasks are often carried out in isolation from the project. There's a need for hierarchical reconciliation of the tasks carried out. We have to pass information up hierarchically before we can put it all together and work out at the project level what's happened. Precise definitions of rights and obligations and technical methods exist, set within a functional organisational context. Authority and communication exist, defined by hierarchic control structures. Hierarchy is reinforced by the location of the highest levels of technical knowledge at the top of the functional groups. Vertical lines of communication through the stovepipes dominate the flow of information. Operations and instructions are issued to people working in functions by their hierarchical superiors. Loyalty and obedience to superiors is a condition of membership of the functional group. Okay. These are two models, so you're going to get polar descriptions here. But I think perhaps that's recognisable in part in some parts of this industry. So those are good for low-level, low-risk innovation. Where the organisation needs to high risk, high levels of innovation, where there are continuous new problems with unseen requirements for action, we don't know where we need to get to, and we don't know how we're going to get there. The organic structure, organic project structures, have been found to be significantly more effective. And again, this is across industries. Just quickly, again, let me characterise the organic project structures. In this structure, special and technical knowledge is contributed most effectively to organisational tasks. The knowledge is contributed to the project first and foremost, not to the function. Tasks are real. They're set in the context of the project environment, not set in isolation in a functional environment. Individual tasks are tested and redefined continuously through interaction with others in the team, but only tangentially with the function. People become genuinely accountable for their own performance. An increased commitment to the project. Peer influence is more critical than one's superior's influence. A network structure of control and authority develops based on who has the relevant technical knowledge at the time. Communication is predominantly lateral. Most communication is advice and information. It's not instructions or decisions. And commitment to the task, to the project, is more highly valued than loyalty and obedience to the function. Okay? Now, I'm not sure that we've got there yet. I think we're moving in the general direction. And as I said at the beginning, what I really want to do is give some pointers of how to keep going on this journey towards more innovation. And so, from interviews, I've interviewed more than 300 senior execs and managers in this industry over about 10 years. And two words that come frequently from those conversations: competence and culture. Competence is used to describe what the people responsible for innovating, facilitating innovation, the competencies they need to have. Okay? And these are typically in roles like therapy area leadership, scientific and commercial governance, portfolio management, project and programme leadership. So the following critical competencies identified: the ability to build and maintain continuous cross-functional interaction, not at monthly meetings, at daily meetings. The individuals are confident enough to make a commitment to a project that trumps their loyalty and obedience to their own home function. That takes bravery. We heard the bravery word earlier this morning. An understanding and acceptance that it's okay for one's peers to trump one's superiors when driving innovative thinking in project teams. A well-honed ability for lateral communication of information and advice. That means the individual has to be able to dispense with the internal personal politics, where personal and functional knowledge often equate to power in organisations. The other word is culture. I hesitate to use it again. It's definitely been a buzzword for 10 or 15 years across industries. Nevertheless, having in place the right culture is continually referred to as the prerequisite to allow innovation to happen. And it was said again already today. A culture is required in which people can effectively deploy the competencies that I've just described and that are on the slide. Many firms are working on creating the necessary culture, and they are, as witnessed by the fact that there are roles called Head of Innovation and Strategy. The important part of this is that the culture has to permeate across all three layers, strata of the R&D organisation, from corporate world through the facilitation layer into the technical world. There has to be a common understanding of what this culture means. Okay, having identified those two operating organisational needs for fostering innovation, competence and culture, where to look for these insights to address those themes we started out with? Well, I've put the 5 themes down the left-hand side of the slide, broken out into competence and culture. And as pointers, identify the knowledge domains in which these two different overarching ideas, where we can look for this information, where we can look for knowledge, practice, experience. The domains do not only imply theoretical and academic knowledge. The domains include real-world knowledge that already exists within this industry and, importantly, exists within other industries. I already mentioned oil and gas. I already mentioned defence aerospace as useful industries. I also would add the automotive industry for high-quality supply chain innovation. Obviously, consumer electronics, mentioned already today. The ability to bring disruptive innovation to the market. Yes, different characteristics in the industry. I accept that. But that doesn't mean there aren't things that can't be learnt. And interestingly, the food industry has it for its ability to manage very high levels of new product failure. This industry calls it attrition. Some studies report the failure rate in new food products as 97%. Okay, it's a phenomenal failure rate. And many of those get much closer to market than the drugs that are attrited before they get close to market. So my point here, really, there are many places the industry can look for ideas and insights for where disruptive innovation can come from, how it happens, how it's managed in other industries, and how this can lead to patients seeing step-change improvements in their treatments and significant new revenue at good margins being generated by the industry. Perhaps we are looking at 2018, 2020 onwards before we really see the impact of these changes. Finally, on the right-hand side of the slide, I've got the areas listed within organisations where each domain, each knowledge domain can be applied. And the point here really is it's a long list of parts of organisations. The point is that it's really saying across the organisation, from top to bottom, these knowledge domains have application. And therefore, it's to reinforce this idea that culture flows down and has to encompass the whole organisation through all 3 layers. Just by way of saying there are others coming to the similar conclusions from different directions. I go back to Ken Caton. The slide shows his view of the fully integrated pharmaceutical network model as opposed to the FIPCO, fully integrated pharmaceutical company. And this is what his view of the future world looks like, with large pharma managing, coordinating academic basic research and translational medicine, with biotech contributing innovation and partnerships around the front end of the life cycle, and CROs supporting from kind of a middle discovery onwards. But look at the words that are being used for what he believes industry should be doing, the buyers should be doing. Coordination, management, execution, monitoring, analysis. These are fundamental core project management expertise areas, with the innovation being carried out in many cases outside of the confines of the firm itself. So in summary, why have I come to you to talk about facilitating innovation? When perhaps most people here are focused on the corporate world of devising strategy and flowing it down to their technical folks. The reason that I want to give you this message is because, in my estimation, you're the people that can create and drive the organisational cultures in which innovation has to happen, and from which significant disruptive innovation can happen. So in summary, industry intuitively understands innovation is critical. The conferences that I go to, the research papers, the research literature, and indeed changing organisational structures themselves demonstrate this. Secondly, perhaps the situation in the industry at the moment is not per se a crisis of productivity. Perhaps it's a crisis of innovation. And that reframing the thing that we want to look at and what we want to address may be beneficial. Innovation is best managed through organic project structures designed to create space for innovation, as opposed to the more commonly found and closer to the mechanistic models that the industry is still trying to move away from. Other high innovation, high uncertainty industries and academia have much experience and knowledge to offer the industry in helping to build environments where innovation can flourish. Much of what is needed to facilitate innovation is known about in other industries. Adopting and adapting that knowledge that exists in these places to build true project structures, organic project structures, working within a culture that encourages for innovation, facilitated by people with the necessary competencies, and I've given you examples of what those competencies are, can make a very significant contribution to the success the pharmaceutical, biotechnology and medical device industries working together to create products that work across all of those parts of industries. And finally, I'm of course always looking for research partners in industry to find out more so that we can bring it back to you in these types of forums where the knowledge has been codified and hopefully can be used in a pre-competitive, non-competitive way. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. I'm afraid we're going to have to move on because we're running a bit of time, but obviously we can carry on discussions during coffee break. So if I could ask